coming to you live from the heart of the Golden State. I'm your host, Roger, and today with me are my co-hosts,
Matt,
Andrew,
Julian,
and this is the Cryptid V podcast. Now play that metallic music.
Nice change of pace.
All right. Cool. We're back.
Thought it was a little fitting with today's topic.
That's true. Before we jump into the topic, not really any new updates. Got, I think, another one or two reviews, or not reviews, but ratings on Apple. But the biggest thing is we are now on YouTube.
Let's go.
Let's go.
We branched out, baby.
So if you, for some reason, want to watch the show on YouTube, the video is literally just our background image with all the audio playing.
Let's go. Let's go.
Until one of the artistic minds here at CBT Studios comes up with some good art for the show. That's just how it's going to look until then. But yeah, I'll throw the link for the YouTube channel below. If you want to go check it out, it'll be in the description of this episode and all further episodes. But yeah, go give it a shot.
All right.
But I think that's really the only bit of news we have to get out of the way.
So this is the Cryptid vs. Conspiracy episode, the next one.
Yes, it is.
And we're on to a pretty big one here. I'd say one of the progenitors.
You know, when I came up with this episode, I thought we need to go big. And then I was like, we also need to come back on one of our promises to show that we are actually coming back with stuff. And so we talked about it when we did the alien abduction episode. And we talked about it briefly, the Roswell incident. So, I figured it was time.
Yeah, like Andrew said, this is one of the earliest, biggest UFO stories. There's one major story I can think about before this, and it's my favorite story. I think it's the best piece of evidence, like hands down, for aliens having reached Earth. It's called the Battle for Los Angeles. And we can go further into detail on another Conspiracies episode, but I believe that one happened before this because it happened during World War II.
And this one's a couple years after World War II.
Yeah, and I mean, just hands down, I can show you guys the picture later, but I think it's just the best piece of UFO evidence. But
probably
then you
the first
have
big one, and then this would be probably the second biggest.
Yep. Then you got Roswell. Do we want to start off just hopping in the timeline of events going on?
Sure. I mean, yeah. Let's go through it.
So the first bullet point I have here on our little quickly put together timeline of the Roswell incident. June 4th, 1947, the military loses contact with a group of military balloons used to detect Soviet atomic blasts. But we'll cover more into detail really what's going on with there. That's just a little precursor of real-world events that were happening before the Roswell crash. Which leads us to our next point on the timeline. June 24th, 1947. Flying saucers are seen in the sky performing different maneuvers by a Mac Brazel above his ranch and later finds the debris of one of these UFOs. Now, we were talking a little bit before, so I don't know how accurate that is exactly, if he saw them, or if it was just general reports.
He broadcasted, this is one of the first broadcasts on national of UFOs, pretty much. This guy was like, hey, I saw this happen, blah, blah, blah. And this is, like you said, this is only, later in this month. This is literally 20 days later after this.
From what I understand, he also came across the remains of whatever was found, the weather balloon, and said it was a weather balloon. He didn't really connect it and went to his uncle.
No, we're talking about this is the broadcast. The guy, this is a entirely separate guy from the...
No, Mac
farm.
No, this is...
Yeah.
So that's why I think my timeline, when I was putting it together, because a lot of the information wasn't super clear on this first point.
I think who you're talking about is the person from Idaho.
Yes. So that's the Kenneth Arnold. Mm-hmm. So he's a guy from Idaho, and he, on June 24th, is the one who basically said, hey, I saw this UFO flying saucer, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And this was broadcast on national radio, I believe, at the time. And so this is like the first major incident, like televised, or, not televised. But
So the first incident was a guy that was just like a witness to something he saw.
this is kind of the incident that leads this later Roswell thing to becoming bigger. Basically, this guy is just saying, hey, this happened. And then a bunch of UFOs and aliens starts to get on people's minds. And then the crash that happened at the beginning of this story on the 4th is at a different farm. And this guy thinks nothing of it until he goes to his uncle's place on July 5th, I believe is the next point on the timeline.
So, there is something I remember, because I've always looked into the Roswell crash, and so some years ago when I was listening to a podcast, and I couldn't find this information for myself, so that's why I didn't put it in the timeline or put it in any of my notes. But it was reported that whatever crashed there on his farm took out some kind of small water tower that he had on the farm. Did you guys hear anything about that at all?
I just heard that
didn't.
he
I
was
heard a
picking
little
up
bit about
stuff.
it.
I didn't hear that it took out anything. He was just picking up pieces of crap on his land. He's like, what the hell is all this stuff?
It would make more sense for like a report if it crashed into something on his property, though.
Well,
But he didn't report this, is the problem.
He didn't report it because he had at that time, there was no telephones and no radio in the area he was at.
Yeah.
So
So
he
he
couldn't
didn't
really
know about this broadcast that
Yeah.
happened.
Oh, okay.
So then he goes to his uncle's on July 5th.
Yes.
And his uncle...
Before we hop right
Okay.
into that, though, going back to the water thing, the water tower, I just wanted to, just in case other people have heard about it, the problem with that idea of the story is that not only can I not find it anywhere, so I don't really want to provide it as a piece of evidence, when researchers did go back to that land years and years later, they found no trace of a water tower being on the property at any point. So, just letting, the listeners in on that little...
So if you guys are
detail.
listening to whatever podcast Matt listened to, take that with a grain of salt.
It's a great podcast. It's just I heard that fact, and I remembered it doing the research now, and just couldn't find it anywhere. I'm sure it's in a book somewhere, and we'll talk more about the books later.
Yeah.
But maybe that's where it came from, but it's not mentioned in any real official mainstream kind of report of the incident. But yeah, moving on, like you were saying, Andrew, July 6th, 1947 is when the farmer, whatever his name is,
Bezel.
Braxwell.
Braxwell.
yeah, he goes, visits his uncle, and tells him what he found, and then the uncle goes to the local sheriff to let him know of what happened.
No.
He goes to his uncle, and his uncle tells him. So Mac Braxwell, not knowing what to do, goes to tell the sheriff and brings the sheriff over.
And the sheriff is the one who then on the 8th of July notifies the U.S. Army. And then they do a press release later in that day.
Yeah, and I think they don't even go there themselves. They send the RAAF.
The RAAF.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and so following that little information on the 6th jumps us down to July 8th, 1947, where the RAAF Public Info Officer Walter Hott puts out a press release informing the public that the military had found and collected one of the flying saucers. In that press release, he says, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Shaves County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office, who in turn notified Maj Jess, a marshal of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office." And that was released to the Associated Press on July 8th.
Yeah. And then the radio towers are sending that information out that same day. I think there's a report of the guy who's running the broadcasting station tried to call the sheriff, but his phones were like blowing up, so he was like, I couldn't even get in
He was
contact
getting
with them.
blown up by like everyone at that point.
And
All the
you can
news outlets.
listen to a lot of those radio broadcasts too. I listened to one of them. It's pretty interesting just to hear it. You know, obviously the audio quality's poor. It's a recording from the 40s, but I mean, it's just interesting. Like, this was a real thing happening at the time, and they were reporting it over the radio. But along with the press release, there were photos taken of the parts that were found. Have you guys seen those photos?
Yes, I have seen those photos.
So it's basically just like, what was it, the couple government army officials and the sheriff, right?
So there's
Basically,
the sheriff.
for those who can't see, you want to kind of describe what's going on in the photo?
Yeah, it's basically the sheriff kind of just looking up, like he's looking at the group, and then it's like tinfoil almost that he's just kind of holding there, and it's a bunch of debris of it.
Ah, okay. So it's what we assume to be pieces of whatever crashed, yeah.
Yeah, and if you look closely, it looks like it's just tinfoil. And
Yeah,
like
it doesn't
sticks and some tape on there. Like, it looks super rudimentary. It's very weird. And then we hop...
Another one. That's with the colonel.
Yeah, it kind of looks like an emergency blanket with some like rips in it.
Yeah, like those like aluminum looking blankets. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Following the next day, July 9th, 1947, an official account was released omitting any mentions or connections to it being a part of any Cold War military programs. So it's just like, okay, UFO, it has nothing to do with any secret government organization doing any kind of tests or anything, you know. We got the aliens.
Yeah.
And then I have here, July 10th, 1947, military personnel talk to the press and give them false accounts on the event and weather balloon.
So basically that's when they rescind their statement about the UFO. And they're like, oh, it was actually a weather balloon. It was probably just something going on. Don't worry about it.
So like with that, when I was reading the like FBI document, it was saying they thought originally it was like a UFO attached to a balloon was the original thing. But then they said it was just a weather balloon.
Yeah, they kind of say, oh, yeah, they gave false testament. This is what it really is. It's just some kind of weather balloon.
But the balloon was mentioned in the original, like, alien part. They were saying it was like a UFO attached to some sort of balloon. They just didn't say it was a weather balloon.
Well, do you want to read us the FBI document real quick since you got it pulled up?
Yeah, I can read it.
And, yeah, I mean, it's if you want to read it for yourself, just search up the Roswell incident. It's one of the first links you'll find. Unfortunately, it's just one page.
Yeah.
They don't really have much to say about it.
Yeah.
I'll cover that part of that later, because there is stuff with that the government kind of, they have released so much on this, and then they have to take it back because of what they released. And people don't believe it.
Does that dial do anything for you?
No. So it says flying disc information concerning headquarters 8th Air Force telephonically advised this office that an object purported to be a flying disc was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico, this date. The disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet in diameter. Further advised that the object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not... it's blacked out.
Redacted.
Yeah.
A lot of redacted on the document.
Borne out this belief. Disc and balloon being transported to Wright Field by special plane for examination. Information provided this office because C7 national interest in case blank. In fact, the National Broadcasting Company, Associated Press, and others attempting to break story of location of disc today. Blank advised would request Wright Field to advise Cincinnati office results of examination. No further investigation being conducted.
Yeah, so it's basically like, yeah, we know what's going on. It's not really that big a deal. People are just trying to figure out what's happening there.
Yeah, and then I think on this same day that this broadcast happened, there was, or around this day, is when they interviewed this Robert Porter guy who worked for, apparently, the U.S. Army, and he was one of the first guys to be like, "Oh yeah, there was a flying saucer," and I was told to like load it on a vehicle or something like that.
Yeah.
That's like one of the first reports of like.
There was two people. I think it was that guy, and then there's another one who kind of blew it off, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we were able to put it in like the trunk and."
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, it was like large enough to fit in a car trunk or something like that. It wasn't very big and stuff
he
like that."
even said it was just like tin foil and
Yeah.
a piece of wood and stuff, and so. But then the other guy came in and said, "Oh no, it took like multiple like trips."
Yeah, he was like this Robert Porter's guy is like an engineer basically for the Army. And he's like, "Oh yeah, this was a huge thing," basically leaning into the alien UFO thing.
And then as far as the timeline goes, it gets pretty quiet after this.
It drops
Nothing's
off
really said
for, like,
officially until the early 2000s to the late 90s, where the Air Force comes out talking about the story, and that just kind of admitting that, yeah, it's kind of just a weather balloon is what we said at the time, but we were really just trying to cover up Project Mogul, which brings us into Project Mogul, which is what I mentioned on my first point of the timeline. Now, if you don't know what Project Mogul is, would anybody like to enlighten the listeners?
It's pretty much just a government program during the Cold War that was using these balloons to test any sort of atomic activity from Soviets. They basically just wanted to make sure there wasn't any Soviets like on the U.S. turf that were testing any sort of atomic weapons.
You said it had like a Geiger counter or something on it.
It would be something along those lines, just something
It was basically to also kind of make sure that that they weren't sending anything over to us.
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah. So, from what I read, it was like 7 to 17 weather balloons that they had like deployed out for this, and they had just lost them. They disappeared, no idea where they went, and then the Roswell incident happens. So that's kind of like the official reason for what the Roswell incident is, if you strip away all conspiracy.
There was also during this period, this blank period, during 1980, I don't have an exact date here, but there's a book that releases called The Roswell Incident, which basically accounts for an alien UFO getting struck by lightning over this guy's farm, and they crash land, and that pretty much starts back up a lot of the conspiracy stuff again, which is why the press they had to do another press release basically saying, "Hey, this is what we're kind of just not."
They've had to do it a lot because there's at least like 4 books that have been written in this time frame where they had to come back out and say something about it.
Yeah.
Or they just had to keep covering it up and doing all this stuff.
The Hangar 18 book that also released, which we'll get into later.
Yeah, so I mean, you can pretty much sum up the Roswell incident as a government cover-up that turned into another government cover-up that they just ended up admitting to in the end anyways.
So, first part of it, that's kind of how they wanted to play it. So, the government had documents leaked of what they called the art of deception, and that's kind of like what they train initiates going into like CIA and stuff. And so it's basically how they go through the list of rules is like the first step they did was when they changed it from, oh, it was a UFO, now it's a weather balloon. And so it's basically like flip-flopping them so that the general public's like, oh, okay, oh, well, it's not this, so it has to be this.
Yeah, but either way, you've got the general public on. You've given them 2 ideas and led them away from your actual goal of, this is...
You distract them with thinking, oh, it's this or it's that, and it might not be either of those things.
Yeah.
So it's like they don't have time.
They're not. No one's thinking, hey, maybe it's not either of these things. Maybe it's some government cover. No, you're on one side or the other. I either believe in alien UFOs and that's totally what it was, or no, you're a crock. It was just a weather balloon.
Yeah. It was also kind of make it to where like everyone that went towards the UFO, like belief is like, oh yeah, they're just crazy. They're just the more radical side over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really split it. I mean, it's completely smart if you think about it. It's like, okay, we'll get the crazies believe in one thing, and then we'll get the rational people believe in the other thing, and then nobody will think about anything in the middle. They'll be so far on each side that they won't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's the two-party system.
So it's like, even if there is no aliens involved, it's still a good story of government cover-up. Like, it's a sign that, even if this other stuff isn't happening, the government's still doing stuff behind your back.
It's basically
just a little more down to earth with what they're doing.
It's the first sighting of the government getting caught doing something that they were like, oh, well, we got to back up from it. And
up until the 60s, or I believe it was the 60s when the CIA was running their mind control program. That's now way later come out like, oh, that one, you were doing that too. Okay.
Yeah,
UFOs and fucking mind control.
They're like, enough time has passed. Oh, it's just this other thing. We're protecting you guys from the war. It wasn't even a big deal.
Now, like we said, there's a big gap in time between the Roswell incident and a lot of the claims that came later on. And one of those was the Aztec crash.
So this basically starts like throwing a bunch of stuff from other incidents into the Roswell incident, because that was one of the first, like we said, one of the progenitors of the alien government cover-up. So now we start getting into a bunch of different conspiracies that are all changing the story.
It's kind of become like a melting pot, the Roswell incident has, for alien stories.
Yeah.
So the Aztec crash was another UFO incident that happened, I believe it was like a month, or supposedly, air quotes, a month or sometime after the Roswell incident had happened. It was a crash near Aztec, New Mexico. It doesn't really talk about recovered alien crafts. This story's more about recovered alien bodies. And it just talks about how there were alien bodies recovered, they were brought back to a base, but somewhere down the line, the scene of these bodies at this crash added alien bodies to the Roswell story. So now it's not just a vehicle crash, now they've recovered alien bodies from Roswell as well. And so that's just kind of where that part of the Roswell story comes from.
I think that also then guides into Hangar 18.
It does. That leads us to Hangar 18, which Hangar 18 was an alleged location at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where they were storing all this alien tech.
And I think this is where we start getting strange metals introduced into our craft that can be bended and reshaped. Instantly, you get a lot of like alien writing starts to come from Hangar 18. So, and apparently this Hangar 18 at the same Air Force base is where the alien bodies are being stored in the morgue here.
Yeah. So it's not even. It gets to the point where it's not even just like alien bodies. It's like alive extraterrestrials that are just in here.
Yeah.
And it goes to be like, oh yeah, they're in a vault, and then there's this bunker, and then there's like a vault door that opens up. It gets wild in there.
But yeah, so that's where the idea for the Roswell aliens come from. There were people that reported seeing the bodies, and the government actually did have an explanation for this too, where they reported all they were seeing were atmospheric test dummies that had crashed on the ground.
And there is an image of these test dummies in like a hangar.
And then they said, I'm pretty sure the public said no. And I think they changed it again to something else. They were just like, oh, well, it was, again, dummies, but not for this. It was testing if people can fly out and survive or something like that.
And then, did you guys hear about the Majestic 12 thing?
Don't get me started on the Majestic 12.
This is basically just the government wrote a bunch of false documents, quote unquote, and gave them to a bunch of UFO aficionados, and basically said these are all real.
And so one of those guys actually had like a good story, and it wasn't like blown out of proportion. It was like solid evidence or just solid facts, and he was just trying to make it to where he can get his point across. But then the government started giving him all these documents, and so then his story kind of just blew out proportion.
Yeah, and so then basically later on the government could be like, this is all fake stuff.
Yeah.
They basically just wanted to say, hey, watch what happens when we give you fake stuff. You're gonna.
And that's another part of the art of deception, was feeding them to just kind of blow the story out of proportion, so that at the end they can be like, well, this wasn't us. This is too dumb for us to be us.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about the books?
I was just going to talk about Glenn Dennis for a sec.
Yeah, I think we should talk about all the books that have kind of followed, because that's a major part of the Roswell incident. And it's just people writing books about it and kind of adding their own narrative and information.
Which is where I think this water tower thing might have come from, is one of the books that was written about it.
More than likely, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the Roswell incident, just the initial book was apparently it was just about aliens getting struck by lightning. Their craft got struck by lightning and it crashed on this guy's farm. That's all I know about the book so far.
Are these books supposed to be like documented, like what happened?
No,
or
they're
more
all
like a loose.
They're all fictional stories that lean very far into the aliens being real portion of the conspiracies. Like the Hangar 18 is very big onto the. I believe in the Hangar 18,
the Hangar
it's like
18
there was an
came from a book.
Yeah,
that whole idea was.
Apparently,
from
it was like
books.
the aliens ejected out of the freaking thing and like died days later from being eaten by animals or something like that.
It came from a book because the writer said he sent people in, and there was his informatives that brought up all the stuff of Hangar 18.
So speaking on Hangar 18, I have some little notes jotted down right here. The idea of Hangar 18 was brought forth by Frank Scully in his book Behind the Flying Saucers, and later expanded on in the book Incident at Exeter. So this guy kind of brought forth like the entire idea and was really the only one to expand heavily on this idea that there's this secret hangar somewhere.
This hangar, by the way, has no proof of existing.
None at all. There's just no evidence there.
There's literally no Hangar 18 anywhere on this Air Force base.
And so then that's where you get the Hangar 18 from. And then the idea of the bodies being there is pushed further. So the ideas of the recovered bodies being there was introduced by another author that goes by the name of Robert Spencer Carr, who claims to have talked to a witness of the supposed alien autopsy. And for the listeners, don't get this confused with either of the alien autopsy videos, which I think we should do an episode just on those two alien autopsy videos. Very interesting videos. So he kind of pushed the idea of the bodies even further by saying, hey, I got this guy. He was there.
And the guy who was there, his name is Glenn Dennis.
Yeah.
And he is later come out to be known as someone who clearly had some issues going on. But he made up a receptionist apparently that was there that could like cover the whole. Oh yeah, she was there. She's my witness to the whole thing. She just doesn't exist. But basically he says, yeah, I worked on the live bodies. I saw a bunch of the dead bodies. These aliens are real, and really started to push there were alien bodies there, and I was working on them thing. And that's for this Carr guy's
funny book. That you mention how this guy's kind of a kook.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Carr's son would later go on to claim he was a habitual liar to the point of often mortifying him and his mother with his larger-than-life tales that he would just tell to random strangers. I believe he quotes the son talking about one of the stories of how he befriended a wild giant alligator in Florida, and they would regularly discuss philosophy topics. And he would tell stories like this just to passers-by, to the point where it's like the mother and son were just freaked out by the ideas that were going through this guy's head.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's an author, a fiction author, and this is way back in the day where everybody was conservative. You didn't really have creative ideas like this. You were just supposed to do your 9 to 5, go home to the family, have dinner, go to bed, repeat the cycle, praise the government. So is he really crazy? Or is it just the world's perception of someone like him at the time?
Whereas we've got a mortician who clearly is crazy. It's making up false people. We've also got an author who clearly has some whimsical tales, but, he's an author. It's a little bit easier to back that up.
Yeah. So that pretty much covers, like, the general discussion and story of what the Roswell incident really is when you look at it under a microscope and not just surface level alien crash, blah blah blah.
Yeah. So to this day, I think Roswell itself has just become more of a buzzword, more so than hey, what actually happened. It's just, oh, Roswell, oh yeah, that alien thing. You know?
And it's really unfortunate because there are good alien stories out there that you could argue are real. Like we talked about in the alien abductions episode, the Betty and Barney Hill.
And so this one was actually fueled by that too, because around that time, was that 50s or was that 60s?
I want to say, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it was in the 50s.
I know that around that time it had just died out. So Roswell had just died out, but then the Betty and Barney Hill incident happened, and so then this thing got brought back up again.
And that's also where so going back to the alien bodies, that's where the idea of them being the little grays comes from, was from the Betty and Barney Hill case. Because there were UFO sightings at this point. There wasn't alien sightings until we hit Betty and Barney Hill, really, where they give you the description of the small grays. And then we get small grays at Roswell. So it's like, it's unfortunate Roswell's kind of the headliner for a lot of alien stories, or the idea of aliens, because realistically it's just stealing everything from all the other alien stories, and there's not a whole lot of basis there for Roswell to really stand on.
Yeah,
I think it's more of that all the other stories happen, and so it started fueling this thing back, and so then people started adding to it.
And a lot of the time you get, that sounds a lot like Roswell, and then you get a lot of people that just kind of fuse them, like, oh, I heard that the little grays were at Roswell, I didn't even know that, and so then you get a lot of,
Yeah, it kind of just spirals out of control.
And now Roswell becomes a much larger story than even what was being broadcasted at the time.
I will say after doing my own first-hand research and not just listening to what other people say about it, I've gotten off the Roswell bandwagon a lot. I'm not really putting much stock there. But the alien bodies, going back there, we can tell nothing's really going on there. But the government does mention, like, no, those weren't alien bodies, those were test dummies.
Yeah, that's
if
weird.
That's all fake, and you can obviously see it was added onto the story after the fact, why would you try and explain away a false fact?
Unless it comes back to the same thing we were talking about earlier. Make them think it's either aliens or false bodies. That way we don't have to explain what actually was happening.
Yeah, that's true. I just thought it was a little weird. Actually, why explain this if you don't really need to?
So earlier government was good at deceiving, but later on they kind of get to the point where they almost are just kind of tripping over themselves, because then they start being like, oh yeah, we're going to release it. And so then when they release information, they're cutting out stuff that is actually happening. And so then people are like, well, what about this? And they're like, oh, okay. And then they take it back, then they release it again. And I think even up till like 2021, they still released it, and people aren't even agreeing with it.
So you think now they're just kind of stumbling over things they've already set up?
Yeah. They're basically trying to cover up a story that didn't need to be covered up in the first place.
Well, what if you...
I feel like maybe they're trying to... Like, if they're still doing that today, I feel like then they're just really trying to play with the idea, like, keep adding things that make people think it's not right, so they keep looking into it.
Well, all they're doing is that they're saying that it wasn't a UFO. So they would say they're not UFOs, but there was sightings of UFOs. And so they contradict themselves at the same point.
What I'm thinking is for the bodies thing, I think it would be really creepy if it was actually people, and they're doing something with these people, and the reason that they're trying to cover it up with the dummies or the aliens is because they don't want you to know they're either testing on humans that either don't have the choice, or they're just like killing people irrationally.
Or like some kind of test flight for some secret weapon or plane or something.
Yeah, something to go on with, like, oh, there were people that died at this incident and it wasn't necessarily regulated, or we don't want you to know, so now we're going to give you two other false narratives.
And I mean, that would make sense a lot more for the government of the past to want to cover something up like that. I feel like nowadays it'd be like, yeah, he was test flying this new plane, we're honoring his death, something went wrong. But back then it's like, well, we don't want them knowing we're testing new stuff and it's killing American people. Yeah. I mean, look at all the problems with
if you look at the pictures of the test dummies, they just look like, they look pretty similar to just some dude. Like, it's like, oh, this isn't like one of those car crash things
the
where they're
car
just
crash
like a
dummies.
dummy, like it has like a face and stuff.
No,
You're
yeah,
like,
these guys are like oddly detailed. For
yeah.
a
So
crash
it's just
test
kind of
dummy,
it just kind of
basically.
makes you think. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, is there any other points we want to cover on Roswell that we neglected to mention before we kind of get into our own little more detailed thoughts?
No, not really.
Not really.
All right, anybody want to? Julian, you're the newest one here. Why don't you lead us with your thoughts on the Roswell incident?
To
After
me,
talking about it, researching into it a little bit.
yeah, like to me, what Andrew was saying makes the most sense. Like, I think aliens are definitely plausible, but I feel like the Roswell incident doesn't have a lot of information that really seems legit, just because there's so much like over such a long period of time, like the 40s up until now. Like, who knows what's gone on with that information? So I feel like it would be more plausible for it to just be like some sort of incident they wanted to cover up. Probably not aliens. Probably, and like, I think the mogul thing sounds, I don't know, that just also kind of sounds like another cover up, but it also could make sense. It's just, I feel like they're probably playing into something else a little bit more than just like, oh yeah, we were actually setting up these things to scan for bombs. Because at the time it makes sense, you don't want the people to know, oh hey, there could be bombs like around. We're
Well,
searching
just
for
Soviets doing tests with anything radioactive.
Yeah.
We don't want to know.
The only thing was that this is so fresh off of like World War II. The Soviets still hadn't even gotten it, so
Yeah.
why they were doing that wouldn't be plausible in the first place.
Yeah, but that's what he's saying, is it might even just be a cover-up for something else.
Yeah, because
like,
after World War II, like, Russians, communists, like, that's their biggest thing they throw at us, and then, like, people just eat that up, I feel like. They're like, oh, yeah, that's right. It was the Soviets.
yeah,
Like,
I'm not going to look into the timeline. It was literally only 2 years later, and the Soviets hadn't had nuclear weapons yet. No, I'm just going to look into, oh, that's right. Right after World War II, the Cold War was a thing. Oh, and Soviets are evil.
yeah, and it's, like, really easy to continue like nowadays you could do that with a war like, I don't know, like Afghanistan or something. I'm sure you could say, like, oh, or even nowadays, communism's still, like, the big threat.
Well, I don't think it's as big of a threat as it was. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people have come to understand that a lot of communist countries are run by some not good people. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's as big of a threat as back in the Cold War era, where it was like, at any point we could have a nuclear fallout. And
Yeah, to me, it's not that big of a threat, but it's for, like, I feel like the older audience, I hear them all the time.
yes, especially the ones that were alive at that time.
Yeah,
they're
'cause
definitely
that-
still stuck in that. Oh yeah, if you're a Russian, you're my enemy.
So
Doesn't matter,
yeah.
what you believe.
So I feel like back then, like, that was just the narrative that was being pushed.
And it was
Like-
really easy to.
Really easy. Nowadays, it'd be way harder to do that. So I think they do it in different ways. I think it's weird they would still be releasing stuff, like, about the incident. Why wouldn't they just, like Matt was saying, like, just not
So,
talk about it anymore?
They try to release stuff after people have died, so they wait until like everyone has died that is related to this topic at all.
Yeah,
That's
the
even
government will
weirder,
do
yeah.
that a lot. Like, this upsets me talking about this, but years ago, I believe it was just a few years ago, they released a lot more on the Kennedy assassination. And everybody's like, okay, cool, we're gonna get some more evidence, some more answers. Well, they release it, a lot of those people are still alive, so all the important information that everybody wanted, still completely redacted. It gave us pretty much nothing new on the Kennedy case, because if you release that kind of sensitive information while people are still alive, it's going to cause a lot of chaos.
Yeah,
And
so they've got to redact anything that's insignificant, that someone could actually go to someone's house and ask questions. Yeah.
or even worse. So that's why, like, we're still getting new information. It's just we're just gonna have to keep waiting to get the real information.
You're basically just getting it bit by bit until one person dies. Okay, now I can finally get this part, or I can get this part.
They kind of give it, like, yeah, once it really doesn't matter anymore and they could move it, or they probably figured out another direction to put it in, then they're like, all right, we'll give you the information you wanted. And then everyone's like, okay, finally, what we've been conspiracizing this whole time might be true. And then it's like, I don't know. It's hard to determine how good the government is at deceiving, because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, they did this, that was stupid, like, why would the government do that? But I don't believe the government makes, like, that many stupid mistakes. I think they all have a purpose. They make it look stupid.
On a big scale like that, for sure. Yeah. I think the government probably makes a lot of little mistakes, I'm sure, but, like, on a big, like, oh, this is some project we're looking into, just, like, the process, you probably have to green light it through so many different people. Like, it's not like that's ever going to be a mistake,
stuff,
you know? Yeah.
So I don't think they're just all willy-nilly with that stuff.
I did forget to bring up this one for the Roswell incident. There was the guy that said that it was a UFO. Mm-hmm. I think he got paid off first.
The one who, the guy who was one of the loading guys? Yeah.
So he got paid off, and then he changed his story. And then Mac Braswell, after he said it was a balloon, and then changed his story again to it was UFO parts, he got detained.
And this is the guy whose farm it crashed on.
Yeah.
And so he got detained after he said it was aliens?
Yeah. He got detained for like a week or so. And then after realizing that the military can't detain someone and hold them by their will, they let him go. And then suddenly the Braswell family had a bunch of money after that.
Which looks increasingly suspicious because then it's like, oh, so not only are you backing up the story about the second that he says something that, oh, the aliens might be real, the second that he says that, you're going to jail him to push even more fire into the UFO crowd, but also now you're going to pay him off.
I'm glad I remember that, because that was one of my bigger things. I was like, okay, that one's the most suspicious I've had.
So the guy that loaded the truck stuff, they paid him off to say it was aliens, or wasn't?
Wasn't.
Basically, so basically they interviewed this guy pretty recently after the broadcast happens. So they interview him and the other guy, the two men, and the one guy brushed it off. Then this other guy was basically like, yeah, it is. And then Roger's saying that they paid him off, and then that guy changed his story to, no, it wasn't anything.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, that is weird. I feel like that leans more into, like, it could be some alien kind of thing. I just feel like out of all the incidents, the Roswell incident isn't, like, the greatest example. But it could, like, it definitely has, it got people thinking, I think. They're like, wait a second, you guys are doing some sketchy shit here.
Yeah. I'm going to connect it to, because I believe in aliens a lot, right?
Yeah.
But this is kind of like my Patterson-Gimlin film of aliens, right? Because it's so popular and it's used as one of the biggest incidents, but it's really just like debunked to all hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the Roswell incident, really what it's shown us is that the government's willing to do shady shit to cover up even more shady shit. And that's really mostly what's come out of it. I don't think there's much tying it to actual alien incidents like a lot of other stories.
And I think we can even debunk the paying off stuff. The jail thing is a little harder, but I mean, the government caught themselves with the alien thing, and if it could 100% be a distraction, it makes sense. But then it's like, okay, well, we don't want people panicking, alien invasion. So all these people who are now helping us with the alien invasion hoax are kind of making it worse now. So let's just pay them off to change their story.
And maybe jail the guy who's talking about it, the one who's at a farm, so we can silence him for a little while.
The most credible source, we need to shut him up real quick, so let's jail him. And then they're like, okay, well, we can't jail him, that's not going to work, so just give him a bunch of money and just get him to completely shut up altogether. So I think, a lot of this is just, it's debunkable. I like the Patterson-Gimlin reference. I agree. I mean, I don't hate it as much. I still think there's things you can take away from the Roswell incident that are good as far as conspiracy-wise, just with the government covering stuff up. That just helps feed the fire of the government's willing to cover up weird shit.
That's the only thing it feeds for me is the conspiracy part. But, like, as for aliens and how people usually use this, so that's the alien thing. It's not.
It's almost not even connected.
It's just like the popular, like, alien incident, but it's not necessarily, like, got a lot of good substance in it. It's just like...
In the books. The books are what really kill it, just because they're the ones that add on all the extra bits. If a lot of that was left out, there might have been something real to really look into here, but they muddied the water.
And there's, like, an entire show based on it, too. It's like a drama show. That's pretty interesting, but I feel like, a lot of that kind of takes it out, and it's like, okay, it seems more like a story, and then, like, a lot of authors and, like, fictional people kind of took it as like a little bit of inspiration, but that kind of nullifies all like
It's almost like
any credibility.
it's almost like this is something that we can just use as a scapegoat whenever we want to throw aliens into the mix. We can say Roswell, and then, oh yeah, that's right, there was that one thing. But it's become so far from its original thing that it's like
There's probably better things now.
there's probably
nowadays,
more current and more legitimate sources for aliens, at least.
Well, and there is a lot, like, it's unfortunate that the information, a lot of good information on aliens got released during COVID. If you guys remember that, when the government actually
the government was like, yeah, there's
footage.
UFOs.
And since then, they've
We're not
changed
saying it's aliens, but there
they've
are
changed
unidentified flying
the
objects.
term of UFOs to UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, is the new official term.
Because it's not necessarily, it's some sort of craft. It could just be the sky shining. Yeah.
But
Well, I
they
think
did
it's 'cause,
come out
like,
and say,
flying,
like,
it's
hey,
not
there is
technically
something weird.
flying, some of them.
I think it was just because it could be like something happening in the air that doesn't even have to do with a machine. It's just like,
It
oh,
could
it's
just
just
be a
some sort
weather
of phenomenon.
Yeah, it's like some beyond our technology.
But so there is, like, a lot of good new information. It's just, it's got pushed under all this other stuff, coincidentally, of course, that nobody looks at it, and they go back to this older stuff that is just terrible.
Yeah.
In the author thing, it reminded me of similar things happening in the cryptid world. I believe it was when we talked about skunk ape, one of the Florida Bigfoots. There's a gentleman down there who supposedly had seen, or I believe he had just seen it. He might have recorded a video, and this guy pisses me off. He has maybe one good experience, and then he wants it to be real so bad, he starts making up stories. He opens a gift shop. He starts doing tours. It's like, you had something great. You had your one experience. But now you want it to be so real, and you want people to believe you so bad. You've muddied the water. You've made stuff up. You've tried to gain fame and fortune from
trying
it.
to get money from this.
It's just completely unbelievable now. You've ruined it.
There's also in Roswell now, there is a UFO museum, and it's opened by I think it's two of the authors of the books.
Yeah, like a lot of that stuff seems more like it's just like
a cash grab.
Yeah,
that's
just
what
like a
kinda
tourist
hurts
thing.
These conspiracy theories is that people are now in it for the fame because they see how much attention they've gotten, so they're like, okay, now we can actually start making a profit off of this idea we have come up with.
And it ruins everything. It ruins believability completely. Like, I have no faith in the skunk ape anymore, because maybe he did have a real account, but I can't believe him. Just objectively, you cannot believe him anymore because he has made false accounts.
Yeah.
So it's similar with the Roswell. These people made fake accounts for the story. So realistically, you should not be able to use Roswell as evidence, period. Even if you make a good point.
Especially, I think Roswell just can't be used anymore on the basis of the initial cover-up. I think the second that you say, oh, it wasn't that story, oh, it was that story, oh, it wasn't that. So now you've had 3 different official accounts tell us 3 different things. So I think that already just screws up. I don't think we should talk about Roswell as like the inciting incident,
All right, now I believe, didn't we scale these on a scale of 1 to 10, these conspiracies, when we talked about them? Or we tried to do something like that?
I think we did do that as a second part, because I know Skinwalker Ranch, we did it as a number system. I don't even know how we came up with it, but it was out of 30. I think after that we did it 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10.
Like believability or just overall
so let's go
conspiracy
around
theory.
in a circle real quick. Just scaling believability. Is this good believable evidence to the existence of aliens or aliens on Earth out of 10? Julian, go.
I'll give it a 2.
I was going with a 2 as well.
Or a 3 maybe.
Nah, I'm gonna stick with 2.
I'm gonna have to go 1. There's no, unless I hear someone with a good, strong argument for it, everything I see can be explained away. It could be another conspiracy, but as far as aliens go, I'm pretty much just gonna have to write Roswell off officially for myself as just a nothing burger anymore.
The way I look at it is compared to just someone saying I saw an alien one time and this happened, I'd say like that's a lot less believable than all this government intervention. I feel like that adds a little bit to it. It's not like a complete, oh, this is just like some tall tale. So I feel like that's why it wouldn't be like a 1 for me. It's got a lot of government involved, so like there's more going on than just like, oh, there's possibly aliens here. So I feel like that's why.
And I agree. I think there's definitely feeds just a conspiracy in general, but as far as aliens go, I just there's no way I can twist it for myself.
I think I can give it a 2 because of the fact that there's something that fell. Someone picked up evidence, and we have photos of this thing that fell. I think that's all I'm giving it a 2 for. Yeah. It's like there was a thing, as opposed to there was literally nothing, just some guy saying something.
Yeah. As for me, I split it into 2. Government cover-up, it's like easily 9.
Just general
But as for aliens, it has to be a 0 for me. And I usually fall into these conspiracy theories, but after like doing the research and having to like listen and read all this shit, there's nothing here. The only thing they would ever have is the alien bodies, but then even that can still be debunked. So
and even that's not even tied to the original story. So it's like, okay, well that's rough. You know?
And I mean, like, even with the Aztec crash itself, that's just got nothing to do with Roswell. Yeah, and that's where the bodies originated, quote unquote, from.
Yeah, and that one's also the one that just kind of fueled the flame of all of this, like, blowing out of proportion.
Yeah, it's really just like a hype story to follow Roswell.
Yeah, and I think there's reason why it's kind of fallen off. I think a lot of media in the early 2000s, it was pretty big. Roswell was like a huge buzz story, but I think nowadays, I think that's probably the reason why no one talks about it anymore, because it's like we've all kind of come to realize this has very little to do with anything alien related.
But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the Roswell case. What would that be, about an average of 1.5?
I'd say, it's somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunate, but I mean, there's just so many better cases you can make for aliens, so many different stories, and we can cover them eventually. But yeah, I think that wraps it up. Any closing thoughts?
Not really.
No, I feel like, we'll probably definitely go over other incidents about aliens that have a little bit more evidence or more believable, but this one just seems to be like you were saying, just like the hot topic kind of thing.
Yeah. So, let us know what you think. Leave us 5-star reviews on this episode. We'll read them out. And
email us your thoughts. You can email us at cryptidv.cryptid@gmail.com. Andrew, that is
CRYPTIDVS CRYPTID at gmail.com.
Close enough. And do we want to give any hints as to what the next episode is going to be? I guess it doesn't have to be a hint. It's either going to be our part 3 of the Cryptid vs. Cryptid finale, the tournament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe possibly an after hours.
One of those 2 is coming up next.
Could be a special episode. We haven't done any special Cryptid v. Cryptid fights, like SCPs or anything like that.
You'll be getting something different.
And then maybe the show after that, we might do like a new show, kind of like the Conspiracies. We'll have another branch off. I'll be kind of taking over.
Yeah.
So, big things on the horizon. Cryptid fights coming up. But you'll just have to stay tuned and check back in with us in 2 weeks after you hear this one.
All right.
And that's been us signing off.
See you next time.
Later.